Hi, I'm Dr. Jyoti Robertson, and I work with JVR Shelter Strategies. And today I am here to talk with you about community data.
Hi, I'm Ross Mock, and I work with JVR Shelter Strategies, primarily as a statistician, and I'm excited to talk about some data today.
When I think about community data, I'm thinking about how animals are relating to the people in the community, but also what other programs are in the community to support the people who have pets. That's the way I often think about community data. What about you, Ross?
I think about, some of the different ways that community data is stored. And so, to have access to that data and to be able to think about it, we need to make sure that we are tracking and monitoring different metrics.
Yeah, so there's this storage component, tracking, capturing the data correct. All of that plays into this idea of community data. And we're so used to talking about data from a shelter standpoint, like what's coming physically into the shelter, that this is really rethinking how we are viewing numbers and how we're capturing some of those metrics and talking to communities about other programs in their communities as well. When you think about storing data, Ross, what kinds of things are crossing your mind?
Well, I'm thinking about things like intakes, an animal coming into an animal welfare organization or shelter would have an intake time, which, and I say time, but that would be the event of an animal entering the care of the facility or shelter. And that intake will have a couple different components to it. One being the date and time which that happened. That can be recorded into the database as well. Another component of that event would be the intake type. These are usually defined by the organization itself, depending on what type of community that organization serves. They'll have different categories of animals intake that they have. And of course, there's other different subcategories that we can talk about later, but also I think about outcomes, which would be any time that an animal leaves the care of the organization or shelter. And that would carry with it similar components to the intake, but of course, different components based on the nature.
Mm-hmm. Now, in both those examples, I view that data as shelter-specific data. So beyond shelter-specific data, we also have this idea of community data. So maybe that's where we're really talking about what other population metrics are being captured outside of sheltering. So whether that is statistics on where animals are coming from, or statistics about income levels in certain populations, statistics related to housing components versus rentals versus owned. So there's all kinds of census data that you can overlay onto communities to get a better sense of how to target specific areas. We've thought about resource deserts, in the sheltering space. And so what's a resource desert? You can think about how many veterinarians are in a specific area. And so what sort of medical services are being provided? So I'm curious, Ross, now you've sort of mentioned the shelter specifics. Are there like statistical ways of presenting this data that's more community based on top of the animal related data, and what are your thoughts there?
Sure. Yeah, so I mentioned some of the intake types. And for example, one of interest in this situation would be a stray intake. And oftentimes, shelters or organizations or local governments will track the location of where that stray intake happened. And that allows you to pinpoint the density of stray intakes to their location, respective location, which carries with it a lot of the community-based components that we look at.
So that's a great example of just this idea of where they're coming from. And I know that in the past we've talked about, okay, there's certain areas or certain zip codes, but now we have so much more detail and beyond just zip codes, and getting a sense of, well, what other programs are in those areas that are already serving the people, and are there ways that now these sheltering organizations can sort of piggyback or work with those other organizations. Here I'm thinking about groups, just as an example, perhaps a group like Meals on Wheels that already provides services to homebound seniors in certain areas, and maybe there's a way to also send pet food or do other things with those other programs as a shelter. So there's opportunities for partnerships when you capture data and metrics on communities and services and animals. Do you have any other thoughts to add here, Ross?
I would say that, it's great that we're talking about this at all, because the more people that are aware and are in it with us and fighting for, understanding of these types of this type of data on a community level is really inspiring. And yeah, I think maybe that takes us over to the map we have on screen,
Okay.
which shows us the Shelter Animals Count database.
So this is a nonprofit organization, Shelter Animals Count, that is combined of many different organizations that came together really to capture data and get a sense of animals that are in shelters that are really out there in the country, and get some really basic data. And it's a nice way to visualize some of the, again, basic data to compare states and to look at what different communities are doing, and it's community-based data. And so it's a starting point, I think, for really having these broader conversations around community data. And just one example, there are others as well. There are other organizations like Pet Health, Pet Point, that's put out a lot of data in the last few months. Best Friends has a dashboard. I believe America Pets Alive may actually have a dashboard as well. We're familiar with Austin Animal Care, I think, that also has publishes their data online on a daily basis. So a lot of different opportunities to be able to present this data. Ross, did you want to actually demonstrate anything on this map, or is this?
I think, we could probably go into this at a later time. There's so much here. But I just wanted to make note of the fact that it's not an easy job to put together all of this information from so many different organizations across the country, who not one of them is the same organization. There's so much uniqueness, and taking all of that information and putting it in a way that you can actually see it across all levels is not an easy job, and I just want to note that.
Yeah, definitely. It's a lot of numbers, a lot of data, a lot of shelters participating. So the more we can capture this information, though, the better we'll be able to come up with policies and processes to really help animals. So it's exciting that these type of projects are occurring. So thank you for listening to our brief introduction about community data, and we'll be diving into this more deeply in future conversations.
Thanks.